So guys, how are you? What if Naruto was became right hand of God got powers movie? In a barely lit and dusty room a figure stood. It was a girl whose features were hidden by the darkness. The girl was rummaging through an old desk in desperation. She was looking for an item of great importance that a certain man told her to acquire. She placed her hand under the desk and searched until her fingers felt a small bump on the otherwise even wooden surface. The girl smiled, this was just like the man. She pushed the bump up, after doing so she heard a distinct clicking sound that she was all so familiar with. Lo and behold, there was a new gap that appeared on the desk. The girl took out a small knife and jammed the gap open. Achoo, she sneezed out cutely as a pile of dust emanated from the secret compartment. The girl waved her, fanning the dust away. As the dust receded she looked at the new opening and saw the object of her desire. She gently took the object and opened it. It was a journal, to be specific, and despite dust that accumulated around it, the book was surprisingly kept in a great condition. The girl looked around the room and saw a small lamp still burning brightly. It was the only source of light in this otherwise dark room. The girl took a few steps as she sat down near the lamp and opened to the first page of the journal. This journal is the testament of my life. This is the proof of both my actions and the consequences that came along with them. So I ask of you, my reader, are you willing to listen to the confessions of a fool? I want you to remember. These are my sins. The girl gulped. This was it. With a turn of a page she was going to learn the truth. She was going to learn of his life. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the page and flipped it over. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath before exhaling. The girl opened her eyes with renewed strength. Hesitation now gone, she looked down on the page and started reading the journal of a fool. Right hand of God. My tale begins in an era long forgotten by time, and it began with the childhood of the founder Brimmer, the first void mage. I could only smile and laugh brightly as I remembered those good memories. In his youth Brimmer grew up in the Holy Land. He was just a bundle of pure joy and mischief. From what I heard about his past, the boy was apparently a prankster and enjoyed often causing trouble for others, but despite his mischievous ways in his youth, the boy was a genius that possessed great power unmatched during his age, allowing him to cast spells of great power without even exhausting himself. Although he couldn't use any of the basic elements like fire, water, wind, and earth, the boy still continued honing his art and slowly made his way to become the greatest magician in existence. With his powers of the void, a young Brimmer bound 4 familiars to his side. His first familiar was a female elf named Sasha. She agreed to form a pact with the boy so he could do experiments on her. Sadly, to the girl's displeasure, the mage turned her into his familiar and granted her with one of his special runes. The rune Gandalf, the left hand of God, granted the elf godlike boosts to her abilities during battle, as well as absolute mastery over all weaponry. The rune was entrusted to her so she could protect the mage while he cast spell. His second familiar was another woman, her name I have already forgotten, but she was granted Mjadvitner, the mind of God that gave her great insight along with power over magical items. And his third familiar, and the most unusual out of 3, was a certain man pulled out of his homeworld and summoned using a very strange ritual. The man became good friends with Brimmer and eventually became the very first Vindalfer and was granted the ability to communicate and command with animals. Sadly, that poor foolish sap was me. The last one, well, she possessed the Liaqf Thorn Rasser, the heart of God, which made her a vessel for great magic. She was a kind girl, but I'd rather not talk about her. The founder spent his time with his familiars going to various adventures and performing experiments, various hijinks that were really fun. Even now, if I still think of those times, all I could remember were the happy smiles in our faces. I wish it would have lasted longer though. If only I noticed the trouble brewing up on the horizon. If only I acted sooner. Then those times would have lasted longer. And the future tragedy would have been averted. Yet I failed to do so. Due to a certain event that occurred which I will be keeping as a secret and taking with me to my grave, the humans were exiled from the Holy Land by the elves. Being the kind man that he was, Brimmer brought it upon himself to retake the homeland. It went downhill from there. Things quickly escalated, and eventually I was once more given a view I thought I have left behind in my previous world. It was a genocide, something I have seen one too many times in my accursed life. And it was the same as the other times in my life, I could do nothing about it. At first Brimmer's actions were noble, so I had to grit my teeth and agree with his actions, but I noticed that the man I served was slowly changing. Gone was the kind-hearted young man, he was replaced by cynical man who viewed the annihilation of another race as the only solution to all the world's problems. He became drowned in his own power that he openly admitted that he preferred using mass genocide as a first solution. He didn't even show any guilt when he sacrificed his fourth familiar, when he sacrificed her to commit atrocities. I was at the end of my ropes. It was the second time a close friend of mine slowly descended into darkness, and I had enough. The man had to be stopped. Right hand of God. Why? Brimmer asked as he coughed out blood. He looked at his chest and saw a sword piercing him straight through his heart. You have lost your way, Brimmer. You have become so drowned with your own power that you have lost all of your respect for life, I replied as I held on my sword tightly. Is this because of the elves? Why? All of them should be purged. They dare take our land from us and drive us to the brink of death. He answered back as blood began seeping out of his wounds. That is why you'll never understand. You were willing to kill hundreds of thousands for a sin your kind committed. Your people were exiled for a reason. Liqf Thornrasser tried telling you that. She tried to reasons with you, and what did you do? You used her as a bomb to kill more elves. I replied, expressing all my pent-up rage and anger over his actions. And I did this so Gandalf wouldn't have to taint her hands with your blood, I added. The man's eyes widened, so Sasha was planning to kill me as well. He paused as he coughed out more blood. Wolf known better than to trust an elf. He looked at his familiar with eyes full of rage. I tell you this, Vindalfr, if not me, then the next to inherit my powers, the elves shall fall, and we will reclaim our land. Nothing will stop us. He coughed out more blood as trying to speak got harder and harder. You are only delaying the inevitable. The man didn't respond as he pulled his blade out of the founder's chest. You are a fool, your ideals for peace, they will never come, the dying man declared with a sadistic grin on his face. I know, I replied as I sliced his head off. I stood there in silence as I flicked his blood off my blade before sheathing it. Sasha, I need a favor. How did you know I was here? The elf asked as she walked out of the shadows, her magical sword in hand. I sensed you, I answered as I kept my gaze on the body of my friend. I felt a sudden heat coming from my right hand as I brought it up. The runes he inscribed were slowly disappearing. I looked towards the elf and saw her holding her left hand as her own runes faded away. I need to talk to the elder, I told the elf. The right hand of God. I journeyed with the former Gandalf to an ancient city of elves. Even though I was human, the elves allowed me to enter their sanctuary, since I was well known as one of the few who went against Brimmer's ideals, as well as being the only creature in existence to have a higher affinity with nature than the elves themselves. I was eventually brought to a room where I met an old elf, in fact the oldest in existence during that time. He was an ancient being who exuded an aura of power unsurpassed by all, even mine. I told the man of the plans that I had in mind and the general specifics of a certain contract that I was planning to make with the spirits of nature themselves. The contract like that is unheard of, the old man replied, and that is certainly a heavy burden to carry, but why would you wish to put yourself in an eternal torment? The man added as he looked at me. I knew that the man was carefully analyzing me. One didn't live as long as he has without encountering one or two fools with insane ideas. I was proud to say mine was definitely insane. Because it's the only way to prevent people from abusing such a great power, I answered without hesitation. You can establish an order to train someone to take over for you for this task. I am sure my kind would be willing enough to help you in your endeavor, the wise man offered as an alternative. No, the hatred between the elves and humans run too deep. I am sure that even if the one who inherits the power is worthy, old grudges will cloud their judgment, which will result in the death of a mage, I answered as the old man couldn't help but nod to my response. And this is a sin that I alone must bear, I added. You're a fool, the man said with a tone of pity. I smiled sadly. I know. The right hand of God. The girl sat still in the darkness as she kept reading of and learning of the events that occurred in his life, the pact he made, the actions he has taken, an entry on each life he was forced to extinguish. It continued on until the girl reached the last page. So I ask you, my dear reader, are you familiar with the tales of the lost magic void? If you are, may I ask you one simple question: for the past thousands of years, has there been any record of void users? If there is none, then good, that means I've done my job. Though it is also painful to admit that for all these years there hasn't been a single person I have deemed worthy of the void's power. As I am writing this, it has been 5,700 years since the death of Brimmer by my hands, and as stated in my contract to spend an eternity in slumber, only to be allowed awaken when the users of the void appear, and since I have already dispatched of the current inheritors of the power who tried to overthrow an empire for their own foolish needs, my time is running short. I do hope that the next time I awaken, those who inherited his powers are worthy of it, lest history repeats itself, which will end with a mage and their familiar dead. Another pair of lives lost into my hands. With great power comes great responsibility. And I exist to make sure the power isn't abused. As I've done for the last 5,700 years. And will keep on doing until the end of the world. I desperately wish for this to be the last entry of this journal. I know it is a foolish wish. But a man can wish right. The first and hopefully last to walk this path. The fool to no end. Naruto Namikaze. So you read it, huh? A voice said, shocking the girl, making her almost drop the book. She quickly tried to hide it behind her back, but she knew better. The man standing in the door was always sharp, so it was a pointless act. Yes, she responded as she looked away from the man. Although he allowed her to read it, she still felt that she saw a dark part in the man's life. She found out about the man's purpose, the man's intentions. The reason for all his actions. And it already brought her to tears. Although foolish, this man was the epitome of sacrifice. Someone had to do it, and he brought it on himself to do so. A sacrifice that made him the enemy of the world. Would you still stay by my side despite knowing all of this? The man asked with a hint of weariness in his voice. She didn't answer. The girl just dropped the journal and stood up. She looked straight at the man's blue eyes as she slowly walked towards him, stopping only a few inches away from him, before she lifted her body up, standing only on her toes as she reached towards a small spot in his tall figure. She smiled before she gently placed her lips against his. It was the very best way she thought of to convey her emotions. It was an act that carried more power than any of her words. The girl eventually parted lips with the man. She smiled as she saw tears streaming down his handsome face, since he often hid his emotions. "Thank you," the man whispered to her ears as he hugged her. The girl responded by enveloping him in a warm hug as well. The two stayed in each other's arms that night. It was the calm before the storm. And with the rise of the sun it will bring forth the judgment for the fool's sins. The small town of Tarbles, known as the homeland of a certain maid of Japanese descent, was in the midst of a great calamity. The air was tense, and the people were scared and weary as they gathered all their valuables and made their way out of the town. Why, you ask? Because two great nations were about to collide, and sadly the small town and its surrounding area were about to become the front lines of a battlefield. The front lines of a war. On one side of Tarbles was the army is led by Oliver Cromwell, a madman who is the leader of Reconquista, a group of nobles whose goal is to unite Halkidjinya in the hopes of reinvading the Holy Land. The group began their conquest by initiating a coup d'etat in Albion, which resulted in the deaths of both the king and Crown Prince Wales. Using Albion as a foothold, the Cromwell and his group decided to launch an all-out invasion against the nation of Tristan. The man rallied his forces of knights, dragon riders, and nobles alike as he rode on top of a magical airship that was geared to the brim for war. And what is the first target on the man's conquest, you ask? The small town of Tarbles. On the other side of the small town, directly opposite to the invading forces, stood the royal kingdom of Tristania, which is led by its own crown princess Henrietta. The dark purpled-haired teen was wearing a white armor fit for battle as she rode her horse bravely into the very front lines of the war itself. The princess herself volunteered to lead their army, for if a leader does not move, who can expect her people to follow? The very wise and brave princess indeed. Beside the crown princess, riding another horse, was a pink-haired girl of small stature. She was Louise Valliere, or better yet known as Louise the Zero. Even though she was branded as a failure of a mage, the girl decided to stand beside the princess, her childhood friend. She knew there was not much she could do in this battle, but her presence itself was to help the princess. Then she was fine staying there by the girl's side. Henrietta along with Louise marched on against their enemy, not fearing them despite being outclassed in aerial warfare. The infamous Dragon Knights of Albion, along with the gigantic airship, was constant reminder that they were sitting ducks in the ground. Even though they have the Griffin Knights at their side, things were still not looking good for them. The princess and her knights reached the outskirt of Tarbles, only to find the Reconquista forces already charging towards them. Seeing the imminent battle in hand, Henrietta gave a battle speech to try and raise the morale of her men. As her warriors cheered, she raised her wand up in the air before pointing it at the opposing forces. "Charge!" the princess ordered as her men screamed out in response before they began charging towards the invading force. The two sides clashed as the airship in the sky kept firing its cannons as it bombarded the warriors of Tristania. Louise just held her breath as she stood beside the princess. This was first time for a few things for both of them. The first time the two of them witnessed hundreds if not thousands die as they were slashed, bombed, crushed, or hit with some kind of magical spell that blew them up to smithereens, sending their innards flying around everywhere. They even saw a man falling from the sky, probably a knight who was pushed off their mount. The sounds a man screaming for his life before his face met the earth would probably haunt the two in their dreams for an eternity. As the two realized that this was the first time they saw people dying en masse as they bravely fought for their own ideals and agendas, the first time the two witnessed war and the sheer brutality of it, it has only been a few minutes and both sides have already lost a lot of lives. It was safe to say that their innocents died that day. Noble or not, the two were already regretting this whole event. Henrietta looked closely at the battle in front of her, refusing to look away. This is war, and it would be an insult to those giving their lives right now if she closed her eyes or looked away. So the girl watched as their side slowly got pushed back. That airship was taking out too much of their forces. If only it was in range, then she would have gladly aimed her wand at it and fire her strongest water spell in an attempt to take it down, but sadly, it seems that the enemy kept that in mind when they positioned the thing outside of any normal mage's reach. Louise on the other hand placed her head down in shame, she felt helpless in this situation, if only there was something she could do to help, she wished her familiar was here, but she already made the choice, come a few minutes an eclipse will occur, and when it's gone so will her familiar. It was the only way to get back to his land, and it would have been selfish of her to deny him of that one small chance, she smiled sadly, it is a master's job to look over their familiar she thought. Ernietta turned around to face her longtime friend and saw the look on the girl's face. Louise, I think you should head back. No princess, the girl replied as she shook her head, I will stand by your side no matter what, she added as she smiled at her as princess remembered that she needed to act strong. The princess just smiled sadly as she looked at her friend, the way the war was going, it was most likely that this might be the last day of their lives, she really wanted her friend to leave, so her life may be spared, but, her friend has always been stubborn. She knew that if this was the last day of her life it might as well be the last day of her friend's life as well, thank you Louise. It's an honor, Princess Louise replied as the sky started to darken, signifying the start of the eclipse. Her eyes suddenly widened when she heard a strange buzzing sound in the air. She looked up like all the others and saw something flying in the sky. It was faster than any dragon or griffin in the air, and it was slowly making its way towards the enemy forces. Sato, the girl whispered as she watched the machine fly in the sky and start laying waste to the enemy forces. It was called the Dragon's Raiment, or what was better called as known as an A-6M0, an aircraft from another land just like its pilot, the current Gandalf and the familiar of Louise, a young black-haired Japanese boy named Sato Hiraga. The girl heard something land beside her, and to her shock, she saw two of her friends from school, the busty red-haired fire mage Kirch and the dragon-riding blue-haired bespectacled Wind Tabitha. Tabitha, she called out as she approached her friend and asked the girl if she could let her ride the dragon. The wind mage silently nodded as Louise got on the dragon before it flew back up into the air. Henrietta just smiled as she watched her friend leave. Good luck, Louise, she silently whispered as she watched a battle in the sky unfold. The right hand of God. Let's do this. The pilot told himself. Don't worry, I got your back, partner, said the boy's trusty magical sword Delflinger. Ah. The teen screamed out as he furiously fired his aircraft's gun as he took out Albion's dragon knights one at a time. Honestly, a few months back he was only a regular kid and now he was in the middle of a war, killing people. He doesn't know why, but it might be because of his runes, but the teen felt no remorse in taking their lives. As long as it'll protect those I care about, I'm willing to kill them all, he thought as he continued his warpath through the sky. Partner, watch out. His sword screamed out as he took down the last of the dragon knights. He moved the controls to the side as the aircraft tilted itself. He was glad that he followed his sword's words, or else he would have been crushed by a wind dragon. His eyes narrowed as he saw who was riding it. Lord Sato spat the name out with hate as he glared at Louise's fiancé, the man who revealed himself as a member of Reconquista and killed the Prince of Albion in front of their very eyes. The guy was on his shit list, and this was the perfect time for a payback. Sato grinned as he made the aircraft ascend vertically high up into the air with such speed that no dragon or griffin could even hope to achieve. Now. Sato muttered as he turned his plane around and had it dive bomb towards wards. The man on top of the wind dragon was waving his sword wand around, probably casting some spell, but Sato was quite confident that no spell could stop him. The man fired a blast of wind towards Sato, who responded by unsheathing his sword and absorbing the attack. The shocked look on the ward's face was priceless, even more priceless, when the Japanese boy shot his dragon down and sending the traitor to his oblivion. Sato? A familiar voice said, getting the pilot's attention. He looked to his side and saw his master Louise standing on top of Tabitha's dragon Sylphid. The girl then jumped from the dragon, making the familiar's eyes widen as the boy suddenly found himself screaming as he directed the aircraft to catch the falling pink-haired girl. Thankfully, Tabitha managed to cast a spell which slowed down Louise's descent, making it a bit easier to catch her. Yubaka, she whispered to the boy as she hugged him. She knew that the boy just sacrificed his once-in-a-lifetime chance to get back to his world. He sacrificed it all to stay here by her side. Baka Inu, Louise whispered once more as she began sniffling. Louise, the familiar said as he smiled while he looked at the girl. Honestly, she was just too stubborn. His warm smile vanished when his partner alerted him of more Albion dragon knights coming towards him. Sato frowned when he tried to fire the aircraft's gun, but it was already out of bullets. He chuckled as he drew Derflinger and pointed at his sword at the oncoming wave of enemies. I don't care if I'm a commoner. I don't care if every one of you are nobles. All I care about is protecting Louise and nothing more. He inhaled deeply before screaming out, I am the familiar of Zero. Louise just stared at her familiar with admiration as she felt her heart beating rapidly. She was already blushing at their close contact, but his words were slowly making her blush even more. Sato, she whispered one last time, before a glowing light came from the boy's runes. And so it begins. Her eyes widened as she heard those voice inside her head. Sato also noticed his runes shining and looked at it. The time has finally come. Awaken Louise, the user of the void. His sword Derflinger announced with pride as Louise suddenly stood up, her eyes losing focus as she extended her wand towards the enemy forces. Partner, do your best to defend her while she's casting her spell. That is the job of Gandalf. Sato nodded as he moved his plane, evading the oncoming enemy forces. He managed to evade the attacks for 30 seconds before the whole area was surrounded by a bright white light, engulfing the enemy forces of Albion and destroying them where they stood. Even the mighty airship did not escape this fate and was sent crashing down to the land. Right hand of God. When the girl regained consciousness after casting her spell, she found herself sitting on her familiar's lap. "Oh, so you're awake? I thought I fired you?" she asked. "Sorry, I didn't understand your letter." I cold dread the language, he deadpanned as he looked away. "Baka," the girl whispered as she pulled herself towards her familiar as she slowly kissed him in the lips. The eclipse ended the moment their lips met as the first rays of the sun shined down upon the two. Things were looking up and it looks like tomorrow would be a better day for the two. Sadly, fate could be at times, for lack of a better word, a bitch, and things were slowly about to get worse, and the two of them were going to be standing in the middle of it all. Right hand of God. In the middle of the Nephthys, the desert country of the elves, also known as the Holy Land to humans, stood a pure water oasis that was surrounded by a small village. Located deep within the oasis was a shrine, and entombed within it was a gigantic blue crystal that surrounded a sleeping man. Naruto Pav. I felt as if I was falling through the air. This was an extremely familiar feeling that I have grown accustomed to the several times I have experienced it in the past. It always meant one thing. It meant that it was time for me to do my work once more. It was the signal for me to awaken from my deep slumber. It was time for me once again to judge the current holder of Brimmer's power. The first thing I noticed after I woke up was that I felt wet, really wet. As I opened my eyes, to no surprise, I found myself surrounded by water. I moved my body around to see if everything was functioning properly. If it didn't, then I'd probably drown here right now and die before my new mission even started. I chuckled at the thought before I remembered I was underwater and was forced to place my hands over my mouth. God, sometimes I really hated it when I just woke up. Stupid half asleep mind I though, as I slowly pulled my hands away from my mouth before I started swimming out of the water and towards the light. I chuckled in my mind at the thought of going towards the light. It was still too early for the former number 1 knuckle-headed hyperactive unpredictable ninja of Konoha to die. Not when he had a mission to do. I eventually reached the surface and immediately began heaving as my body desperately tried to get more oxygen into my body. As I slowly calmed my breathing, I started swimming into the shore. I ignored the sounds of gasping and screaming all around me as I walked out of the oasis. I've been used to it, as I have received the same reaction every time I woke up. I swear to Kami, sometimes someone should really just post a sign here that says, if a yellow-haired human rises from this lake, don't be alarmed, just don't mind him and go back to your business. Speaking of which, I should probably ask the current elder to do that. It really saves a lot of time and trouble. I looked around. Yep, it was the same reaction all over again, with me standing here naked like always, which was odd enough since I always remembered wearing clothes before I fall asleep, with the girls blushing, the guys gasping, and in 3, 2, 1. I mentally counted down as a group of elves surrounded me. The army arrives and will probably be here to restrain the human for trespassing in their holy ground. What is a filthy human like you doing here? One of the elves surrounding me asked as he drew his sword and pointed it at me. Called it, I thought, as I didn't answer the elf. Judging from the man's tone and posture, he was one of those types who never really listened to reason. Even if I talked, he'll end up attacking me and he'll probably end up killing him in self-defense. And I know once I do that his friends will come charging in to attack me as well. I know from experience that things will end badly for them. Wait, don't attack him. A voice came from the crowd as they slowly parted. My eyes widened when I saw who it was. She was an elf with cerulean blue eyes and long blonde hair which went to her back. The girl was wearing plain green elven clothing, and even though it was simple, it made her look beautiful. The girl also bore a stunning resemblance to my old friend Sasha, that I almost called her by that name. It was good that I didn't, or else this scene might have been more awkward. The girl stood in front of me as she separated me from the elf that was only moments away from his death. This is no time for your human curiosity, Luktiana, the elf told her as he kept his blade pointed at me. That's not it, Ari, the replied as she waved her hands defensively in front of herself. The elder told me to bring this man to meet him, she added as she tried her best to defend the man. The elf's eyes narrowed as he stared at the girl. Very well, but if I find out this is just one of your st. I didn't hear whatever he was planning to say, because before I even noticed it, I was already getting dragged away from the scene by the girl called Luktiana. Yep, the girl just dragged me, who was still naked all over the place. If I was younger, I would've died right there and then because of the looks I was getting from the female elves. That was never a good look, and for the love of Kami, I did not want any frigging fangirls. It was hard enough to get away from them before, and I would rather die than experience that again. Judging from the looks I was getting, I was going to die soon. Mother, father, and everyone else in ninja heaven, I will be there soon, I thought as I closed my eyes. We're here, the girl said, brining me out of my random musings. Did you really have to drag me here naked? Wherever the hell here is, I asked her, trying my best not to sound sarcastic, and I knew I was desperately failing at it. Ah, sorry about that, the blonde elf responded before she blushed as she closed her eyes and quickly looked away from me. Apparently she did not noticing my state of clothing during the whole time. How the hell is that even possible, I thought before I looked around and saw exactly where we were. It was a familiar place. How could I not know the place? It hasn't changed for a few thousand years. It was the simple looking temple made out of some kind of elven metal where the elf's elder lived for generations. Hello Naruto, it is certainly nice to see you again, said the old wrinkly elf who was sitting in the middle of the room. I'm sorry, do I know you? I asked as I tilted my head to the side. I really had no idea who this old man was. For all I know, everyone who was supposed to know me was already dead by this time, since if I recall correctly, elf's lifespan only lasted for 200 to 300 years. Then again, I don't know how long it's been since I last slept. The old elf just chuckled weakly. I suppose you don't remember the person who found you the last time you woke up? I chuckled as well. How stupid of me, can you really blame me? You were like what, 5 when you saw me walk out of the oasis? At least you remembered me, Naruto-san, the old elf responded as he looked at me with sadness and pity. So you know my story, huh? I asked him as I looked at the old man and remembered him as a young hyperactive kid who I spent a while teaching pranks ages ago. The man's previously happy face suddenly dropped as sorrow immediately replaced it. Yes, as it has been a tradition for the previous elder to tell the next one of your unique circumstance, the old elf said as he looked at the only other elf in the room. Lactiana, would you mind leaving the two of us alone? The old man coughed. Tell the rest standing outside to leave thee as well. This man is trustworthy, he added. I noticed the young elf quickly nod before she took one last glance at me, blushing as she did so before leaving the room. First things first, can I get some clothes? I asked. Well, you will see that your previous garments are still in top condition, the old elf said as he pointed at a small shrine in the room. You placed my stuff in a shrine of all places? I asked as I slowly made my way to the shrine, and as the man said my stuff was in good condition. It seems the runes Sasha made and I improved and perfected over the years really made my armor last this long without it rusting. I placed my hand in the shrine as I pulled out a mesh shirt and wore it. It was a really thin chainmail from my homeland. I then took out a pair of brown pants and combat boots, wearing the pants before the boots. Afterwards I took out a pair of black metal arm guards that immediately wore. I clenched my hands into a fist for a while. After wearing it, as I smiled, they still felt as comfortable as the first time I wore them years back. There were 2 more things in the shrine. The black chest plate with silver runes engraved over them and some folded red cloth which I assumed was my cloak. Okay, 2 questions. I looked at the man as I wore my armor and cloak. 1. How long has it been since the last time I woke up? I said as I put up one finger. 2. Where the hell is my sword? I asked as I put up another. Well, for the first question it's rather easy. It has been 300 years since your slumber. He paused as he coughed once more. As for the second one, well, it's… Oh God, please don't tell me it's in some kind of shrine where it's being praised and worshipped to as some kind of sacred artifact. I cut him off as I jokingly took a stab in the dark. Well, you didn't hear it from me, the old elf said before he chuckled. The palm of my hand met my face. Can you please point me out where that stupid talking sword is right now? Are you already planning on leaving, Naruto-san? The man asked me with a hint of sadness and bitterness in his voice. I looked at him as I smiled sadly. From the look of things, the elf was nearing the end of his life. The best thing I could do is spend a while listening to him, but I had something I needed to do, the very same thing I've done for the last few thousands of years. I'll tell you what, he'll be back soon, and when I come back we'll have a talk over some drinks, I told him as I noticed the old man smiling sadly. Perhaps that would be good, the man added as he closed his eyes. Lactiana is probably just outside, you can ask her where your sword is, the old man added as I turned around and slowly walked towards the exit. I looked back at the old elf as I decided to leave some parting words. Gaki, just make sure you're still alive when I get back. I really want to hear how your life turned out to be, I told him before I left the temple, apparently missing the warm smile on the man's face. Lactiana, I called out, and just as the old man said, the elf was standing just outside the temple. Yes. The girl responded as she suddenly started to fidget. Can you point me to the direction where my sword is kept? I told her as I began describing what my sword looked like. Oh yes. Follow me, the girl said as she started walking away. I just shrugged as I followed behind her. So how are you related to the elder? I asked her randomly as an icebreaker. That's my teacher, she answered before she paused. You see, I'm a researcher, and I spend my time researching humans, she added, as my eyes suddenly narrowed as I thought about what she meant about researching humans. If she was doing what I was thinking, then the moment I got my sword she was the first to fall by it. I study mostly about their culture and how it's vastly different from ours, she finished as I mentally sighed. Good, no need to kill such a nice girl, I thought to myself as the two of us ended in front of another temple, this one looking a bit grander than the last. I followed her as she walked and ignoring all the glares I was receiving from all the elves who were apparently praying in this place. My eyes widened as I saw what exactly they were praising with offerings of foods and prayer. The fuck, I muttered out as everyone in the temple, even Luktiana, looked at me. Ignoring everyone else, I started walking towards a grand-looking altar, which had a pedestal holding up a 73 centimeters sword with a circular guard. It was sheathed in dark red scabbard that had a small symbol of my mother's clan engraved in it. Yep, my sheathed sword lying on it, and people were praying to it as if it was a god. Boy baka ken, time to go to work, I said as I kicked the blade off its pedestal. The sword landed on the ground with a loud thump. Oh god, the silence that came after it was almost deafening. I walked towards the sword and took it as I tied it around my waist. The silence around the room turned extremely deadly. You dare defile our sacred treasure, said one elf that I ignored. Kill the humans, said another, which I again ignored. Give that sword back, said a third one who, like the two before, I ignored. Yeah, put the sword back in its pedestal came from my sword. That shut everyone up. So you finally awake, Dai-chan? I asked as I looked at my blade. It wasn't like Derflinger who talked through his quill and my blade just projected her thoughts to everyone in the area. Yeah, thanks for waking me up, my sword sarcastically responded. Mind telling me why you're in a shrine? I asked my sword as I walked out of the temple. I'd rather not, I sighed. Seems my blade hasn't changed in the last 6,000 years and it's still the same old selfish, egocentric and narcissistic blade that I came to tolerate. I swear if she wasn't useful I would've tossed her inside a volcano ages ago. So mind telling me why there's an elf that looks like my creator following you? It asked me as I suddenly stopped walking, remembering that I was technically with someone when I went to the temple. I quickly turned around and yep, right behind me standing still was Luktiana. Do you need something? I asked her as I tilted my head to the side and scratched the back of my head with my left hand. Maybe she wants to mate with you, my sword whispered, and from the huge blush that the elf sported she whispered aloud. Baka ken, I thought as I looked at the elf once more. Now that I looked at her closely, despite the fact that she bared a resemblance to Sasha, she was a bit more lacking in the Baka ken I though once more. So do you need anything? I asked her again. The girl gulped before she looked straight at me as she probably mustered out all of her courage. I heard from my teacher that you're planning on leaving this place to go to the land of humans, and I was wondering if you can take me with you, the girl told me before she placed her hands over her chest and poked her fingers together in a similar way as an old friend of mine did ages ago. Why? I asked, honestly surprised at her question. I knew for a fact that elves downright hated humans, and the same can be said for humans hating elves, so why the hell would she want to go with me, a human, to a place where she will be most likely persecuted and killed? I told you earlier that I was a human researcher, right? Well, I wish to understand the humans more so that one day the two sides might come into terms with each other. I think that just because it's been a long time since the two sides even interacted is not a justifiable reason to start calling the other side the devil, the girl said as she placed her hands on her hips and smiled proudly. I smirked. So we have an idealist who wants to see the world. Normally I wouldn't even consider bringing her along, as she might get in the way of my mission, but as I looked at her, I couldn't help but remind myself of a few people I knew in the past. Even her wish somehow got to me, since it was the same wish I had long ago. Before it was trampled on and spat at by my friend. Seeing as there was nothing really wrong with having a traveling companion, I responded with very well, but don't slow me down or I'll leave you. Pack your stuff, we'll leave in a few hours, I told the girl as I turned around and walked away. I just smiled when I and probably everyone in the whole village heard her yell out YESSSS. This is going to be an interesting journey, I thought to myself as I continued walking away. Right hand of God. I spent a few minutes in the small village gathering supplies for my journey, a satchel of water, a few herbs, as well as various preserved meats. After that I spent the last few minutes walking as I eventually reached the outskirts of the village, and as expected, there was nothing but sand all over the place. Garwold loved this place. Seeing as there was no better spot than this one, I sat down on the ground lotus position as I slowed down my breathing and closed my eyes. It was a process I've learned almost eons ago from the frogs, and I have to admit it is one of most useful skills I have ever learned. Hell, without it, it'd be dead, and Brimmer would summon someone else as his Vindif. I kept breathing slowly as I purposely brought myself into a near-death state. I smiled as I felt the natural energies of the land slowly making their way to me. I kept my eyes closed as I concentrated and connected with nature itself. I became one with the earth and felt the presence of all the lives in the entire world, one of the few benefits of my contract with nature. But I didn't care about them, I only cared about those that held the rare power of the void. I increased my concentration as I began filtering out all of the normal presences I felt. I was already sweating as I managed to isolate 4 people out of all the inhabitants of the world. To my surprise, there were 4 people that somehow hold the essence of emptiness within them. I frowned as I looked at the 4 most likely void users once more. The most I had to deal with before was 3. Having 4 of them right now might complicate things. I concentrated once more as this time I tried to figure out their location. 1 in Tristania, 1 in a forest near Albion, 1 in a castle in Gallia, and the last one was in Romalia, I said to myself as I began thinking of how to start with this journey. The most logical choice would be to head to Gallia first since it was the closest to border Nepthes, but the strongest feeling of the void was emanating from Tristania, and if I went there I could easily go to Albion afterwards, before heading to Gallia then Romalia last. I'd rather prefer going to that kingdom last, since I had some extremely bad history with it. Tristania it is, I said to myself as I stood up and dusted myself off. I looked at the wide desert in front of me and sighed. It's times like this, I wished I mastered Dad's technique, so I don't need to trek to this desert each time I leave. Too bad all the scrolls that I was supposed to inherit was burned and destroyed, along with the entire village where it was kept. Naruto. Someone called out from behind me. Turning around I saw Lactiana. Aside from the clothes she was wearing earlier, she now sported a dark brown cloak over it and a small bag behind her back. I gave her a once over and smiled. Well, someone looks excited. This is the first time I'll leave this oasis, of course I'm excited. So where are we going? The girl replied as she pumped her fist in the air. We're going to this place called Tristania. We'll pass by a few places before going there, so you will have a lot of time observing humans for your research, I told her as I looked at my supplies and my sword, which oddly enough was quiet for some reason. Well, ladies first, I gestured to her with one hand towards the desert, telling her to go on. The girl smiled, her embarrassment from only hours ago now replaced with confidence and excitement as she took the first steps out of the oasis. I followed after her, walking just a few paces behind her as we began making our way through the desert, our first destination. After a few hours of walking in the desert I suddenly stopped as my eyes suddenly widened. Shit, I forgot to ask about the sign. I face-palmed as Lactiana just looked at me like I was crazy. Who could blame her? Isn't everyone a bit crazy inside? Right hand of God. Sato's Pav. It's been a few months after the battle in Tarbles and quite a few things has happened since then. Due to our efforts in the war, Princess, or should I say Queen Henrietta, finally awarded my master a medal for her valiant effort. She was happy and I was happy for her as well. Who old, and she just received a medal for the Queen for wiping out the enemy forces. Although I don't think she realized that she killed a few thousand lives with her one spell. Another thing noteworthy of mentioning is Louise's element. Apparently it was the reason why she sucked at all the other elements, since she had the affinity towards the 5th and lost element, the void. I'm really happy for her since she can finally use magic, but does she really have to use those explosion spells every single time I talk with another girl? God, I swear if she screws up her control and overcharge her spell, me and whoever it is I'm talking to at the moment may be reduced to ashes, and I know for a fact that she'll blame me for it. Well, that's just like master. Aside from that, it's been pretty normal lately, the war against Albion aside. Yes, normal in the sense that we had to rescue the queen who was kidnapped, fight a zombie version of the Prince of Albion, deal with the queen's knights who took over the school and started training all the mages in physical combat, and worst of all, deal with this Romalian pretty boy who moved into the school. Speaking of which, that git challenged me to a duel or else I'll be kissing my master, something I did not want to see in this or any other lifetime. Because of that I had to go through hell training with Agnes, Queen Henrietta's trusted chevalier, to prepare for our duel. Really sucked that my Gandalf runes didn't activate when I used a wooden sword, or else it'd be kicking Julio's ass to next week, even before our match started. But alas, nothing goes as I want to, and am now holding my wooden blade and standing face to face with the heterochromic pretty boy. I swung my swords a few times to attack the man, only for him to skillfully parry my blows before moving forwards with his own flurry of attacks, forcing me to back away and defend myself. By trying to block and evade his blows, I eventually lost my footing and fell to the ground after he pushed me back. Shit, I thought as I quickly rolled away just in time to avoid an overhead slash from the pretty boy. I immediately stood up and placed my wooden sword in front of me. I was already breathing heavily, yet Julio hasn't even broken a sweat. I gritted my teeth in frustration as I tightened the grip on my sword. I screamed out as I swung my blade once more with all my power. The boy gladly met my blade as the two of us clashed again and again. I jumped back after a few more exchanges and only had a few seconds to rest before Julio came charging in. As much as I hate to admit it, the boy was good. His swordsmanship was flawless and near perfection. Putting the minimum amount of energy and effort to his blows and yet managing to achieve the optimum results. Plus I could only marvel as his movements, every step was elegant and he didn't perform any unnecessary moves. This was so rigged, I swear even if I was using Gandalf I might still have a hard time fighting with this kid. I tried provoking him, and when I thought he took the bait, I swung my blade only for him to sidestep out of my attack. He tried the same with me and for the love of God, I fell for it and was open to his attack. Julio charged in sword in hand, attempting to use my opening to finish this match. I quickly brought my blade towards his blow to try and redirect his attack, but something happened. I noticed it, the smile on Julio's face, as he purposely loosened the grip on his sword. I narrowed my eyes as my sword met his, and as predicted his blade was sent flying away as he suddenly clutched his arm in pain and knelt down. "I lost," Julio said dramatically as he kept hold of his hand. I just glared at him for purposely throwing this battle away. What was the reason for all of this? I thought to myself as I sensed my master Derflinger in hand walking towards me. "Good job, partner, so why don't you take up your price and kiss your master?" My sword teased as my eye saw Louise blush from the side of my vision. I smiled for a moment before I focused on the Julio who was now surrounded by girl. It seems he noticed my glare as he looked directly at me and smiled. I was about to throw my sword away before leaving, but I stopped when a loud sound of clapping echoed throughout the whole courtyard. I and probably everyone else in the area looked at the direction of the loud clapping and saw a man sitting atop the school gates. The man was probably around in his early or mid-20s. He had spiky blonde hair and cerulean blue eyes. He was also wearing what looked like a chest plate accompanied by brown pants and boots. The man had a long sheathed sword tied in his waist, as well as a red cloak that was waving with the wind. A red cloak that stood out like sore thumb, yet for some reason no one noticed the man until he clapped. That itself already sent alarms ringing into my head, and in fact I wasn't the only one. I looked to the side and saw all the knights stationed in the area, already adapting battle stances as well as Tabitha, and to my surprise, even the kind-hearted Professor Colbert who watched the duel had a look on his face that told stories of countless of battlefields as they made their way in front of the other students to protect them from the man if needed. I kept looking, and what surprised me the most, even surpassing Colbert's war-ready look, was the look of pure shock and fear in the face of the Romalian knight. It was as if he was looking at death. I gulped as I quickly took Delflinger from my master and drew the blade, positioning myself in front of my master. "Who are you?" the leader of the knights, Agnes, asked as she kept her sword drawn and pointed at the intruder. I watched as the man stood up and jumped from his spot as he slowly made his way towards us. I gulped as the man's eyes landed on me and my master behind me. I honestly felt scared at those blue eyes that looked as if they were furiously analyzing me, looking at each and every one of my movements and gestures, as if he felt like the man was appraising my worth as a human. "Who am I? Isn't it a bit rude to ask for someone's name without introducing yourselves first?" the man asked in a tone of slight condescension. "I am the Queen's loyal knight, commander of the Musketeer Brigade. Now tell me who you are and what are you doing here?" Agnes replied as she still kept her blade pointed at the man, and by the look of it, she was ready to strike even before the man replied. "Well, who I am is not really that important," the man replied before I saw him take a few steps back as he skillfully evaded Agnes' attacks. I watched in awe for a few seconds before I quickly snapped out of it. The man was playing with Agnes, and she was probably the best swordsman barring Julio in the school right now. This was really bad, and to make things worse, Derflinger started talking, his playful tone gone, replaced by one of pure panic. "Partner, grab the princess and run." I looked at my sword shocked as I tried to process what he just said, and to my surprise, I managed to mumble out the most intelligent words I can think of at that very moment. I said, "Grab the princess and run right now, that man is dangerous." My sword screamed out something I was sure that everyone heard. Now, no need to be afraid of me, Delfcon. I am not here today to do my mission." I grabbed Louise and jumped back as the man was apparently only a few inches away from me without me even noticing it. As I jumped back, I saw Agnes' body lying on the ground, probably unconscious or worse. I gulped, not wanting to think of my sword teacher's fate. "I am just here to see the current wielder of his power," the man added as I sensed my sword tense up. "Who are you?" I heard Louise ask the man from behind me as she looked over my shoulder. "So you are one of the 4 possessor of the void, huh?" the man said as he looked closely at Louise. Judging by the fact that she hid behind my back once more, I was sure that she was feeling the same thing I felt right now. "Fear. For?" I heard Professor Colbert ask amidst the crowd. "Yes, but I'm quite surprised. When I came here I was even given the pleasure of watching the left and right hand of God clashing their swords. Isn't that right, Cowhide-kun?" the man said as I just looked at him strangely, not really getting what he was saying. "But I have to say I am quite disappointed at you," he pointed at me. "Gandalf-kun, I faced hundreds who bore those runes, and you look like you are the weakest amongst them." I gritted my teeth as I didn't let the man provoke me. I knew that if I even left Louise's side she would most likely get killed. My eyes then widened as I repeated his words over in my head. "What do you mean hundreds? I'm the only one after the original Gandalf to bear these runes." The man smiled and it unnerved me. My quite a good head you have over your shoulders Gandalf. He then turned around and started walking back towards the gate. I have seen enough. I will be back after I have met the others. I will reserve my judgment by then. I looked around and saw the other knights starting to run towards the man, while Colbert and Tabitha both began casting their spells to attack him. My sword screamed out, but it was already too late. I saw the man turn around and look at all of us before I heard him snap his fingers. The world shortly descended into pure chaos after that. In front of the man what can only be described as dozens of wind blades appeared and was sent flying towards us. I watched in shock as it sliced through the knights, as well as Tabitha and Colbert's spells like they were nothing. I gulped as I saw a blade of wind heading its way towards me. This was different from Ward's wind. It was stronger, sharper, and deadlier, and we were in the receiving end of it. In hindsight, the knights should have listened to the 6,000-year-old sentient blade and just let him walk away, but no, the knights had to try and detain the man. Shit, I thought as I kept myself in front of Louise. She was the one I needed to protect, and there was nothing I could do to help the other knights as I watched them get slaughtered by the waves of wind the man was sending. I brought up Derflinger and tried to use it to absorb the man's attack, emphasis on tried as I had to bite down hard and tried my best to not scream out in pain as several cuts appeared all over my body and his hands. Before I knew it I was already a bleeding mess and my sword Derf was already shaking. This is bad partner, my sword said, stating the obvious. Sato Louise screamed out from behind me. I knew she was probably near tears right now. I couldn't blame her, even I was nearly in tears. I quickly pushed her aside as I brought Derfliner up one more time to block another blade of wind headed for her. I gritted my teeth hard as I felt myself getting pushed back by the attack. For such a small and simple blade of wind, it carried more weight than the punches of Focket's golem. Just that was a testament to the strength of this attack. I saw my runes glowing over time as it tried its best to help me go against the attack. Time seemed to freeze as I saw another blade of wind, this one not aimed at me. No, this one was aimed at the one I pushed away earlier. It was heading for Louise, and judging from the shocked look in her face, she was too stunned to react. She was going to die in front of me. No, I won't let that happen. I'd rather die than see her die in front of me. I tightened my hold on Delflinger as I poured all my strength into pushing the attack away. I screamed out as my runes began shining to the point that it looked like there was electricity surging out of it, and to my surprise, I managed to redirect the blade of wind and send it away, but it cost me my sword as I was forced to let it go. I was now weaponless, and there was still a blade of wind heading for Louise. The choice was obvious. I stepped in front of my master and took the blow for her. I heard Louise and a few other people scream my name out as I felt a large cut appear across my chest as I fell backwards before my body hit the ground and my mind went to the land of the unconscious. I saw something, one single thing that would make me question sanity if I ever thought of it again. I saw his face, the face of the man who attacked and slaughtered the knights, the very same man who just attempted to kill Louise. How could such a man who performed such a cruel deed have such a warm, caring yet sad smile on his face? Why? That was my last thoughts before my vision turned black. Right hand of God. Naruto Pav. I smiled after I saw the current Gandalf take the attack for his master. I purposely weakened that attack to see what the boy would do, since most of the Gandalfers I faced in the past were often barbarians who only found joy in battle and cared little about their master's life. Even though he was the weakest amongst all the others, he possessed something that none except Sasha possessed. It was the selflessness to lay their lives for their master, and that action itself already placed him in high regards in my mind. I looked over his master and saw the caring look in her eyes, one filled of genuine concern over her familiar. It looks like him off to a good start, I told myself as I looked at the two who by far were the already looking better than the previous Void users. I let my smile vanish as I turned around once more. Goodbye, inheritor of the Void. I hope you are better than your predecessors, I told them before as I began walking away. Albion was my next destination, that is after I go pick up Luctiana since I ditched her in a few towns back. I continued walking towards the exit as the wind blew and my cloak once again waved proudly behind me, only this time no one was stupid enough to try and stop me. Thanks for watch here guys.